Welcome to the Group of Five Focus podcast, where we take some time each week to highlight a few significant G5 matchups and showcase the power of the Group of Five. I'm your host, Brian Doppel. In this episode, I'll recap the action from Week 6, provide my G5 conference performance rankings, and look forward to Week 7, including a handful of rivalry games, and some guests join the show to preview my game of the week. We'll get into it after the break. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and much more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place, and best of all, Anchor is totally free. Let me tell you from personal experience, when I first started this podcast, I knew about Anchor, but I wasn't sure if it was exactly the right tool for me. After a little poking around, I found that in fact it was, and when I had some questions when I first started my podcast, Anchor support was there to help. So if this sounds like it might be the tool for you to start your podcast, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the Week 6 performances from the Group of Five conferences, and I'm going to go in reverse order of my G5 conference rankings for the week. So we're going to start with my number 5 conference performance of Week 6, and so we're going to start out with Conference USA. It was honestly a strong week from CUSA, but some of the other conferences just had some more interesting performances, some more surprising performances, and some more dominating performances. But as we're getting into more conference play now, there are fewer games to recap. So we'll start with UAB and Middle Tennessee State. UAB got out in front early in this game and ended up beating the Blue Raiders 41-14 in Birmingham. UConn went to Florida International, played in Miami, and UConn got the win 33-12 over the Panthers. And UTEP went to Louisiana Tech and lost 41-31 in a nice home win for the Bulldogs. Also in CUSA, rounding out the conference games of the week, UTSA hosted Western Kentucky and survived a last-minute push from the Hilltoppers to win 31-28. Moving on to my number 4 conference performance of the week, we're looking at the Mid-American Conference, the MAC. So in the MAC this week, Eastern Michigan went to Kalamazoo to play Western and came away with a big win, 45-23 in convincing fashion. Eastern Michigan was up 35-7 at the half. So this was a convincing all-around win for the Eagles. Well done to Eastern Michigan. Buffalo went to Bowling Green and got a blowout win, 38-7, a convincing win for a Buffalo team that is now 3-0 in the MAC. So looking good for Buffalo here. I've been saying all season I expect Buffalo to have a good season, and it seems as though after a difficult non-conference schedule, they're starting to figure themselves out, and so they're 3-0 in the MAC and 3-3 in conference after that nice win over Bowling Green. Ohio hosted Akron and got a big win, 55-34 over the Zips. Meanwhile, Ball State went to Central Michigan and escaped with a narrow victory, 17-16, with a fourth quarter field goal to seal it for Ball State there. Toledo went and played Northern Illinois and got the win 52-32 over a Northern Illinois team that is struggling this year. They're 1-5 overall and 0-2 in the MAC. I was expecting Northern Illinois to get off to a better start this year, but Toledo has certainly had a strong start, 4-2 overall and 2-0 in the MAC after this 20-point win over the Huskies. And in Kent State went to Miami of Ohio, of course. And the Redhawks came out with the win over the Golden Flashes, 27-24. They survived a fourth quarter push, really a second half push from Kent State to win by 3 points there in Miami. My number 3 conference performance of the week is the American Athletic Conference, which started play on Wednesday as SMU traveled to UCF in a game that was moved from the previous Saturday due to the storms in Florida. But SMU was looking for their first win. Well, this is their first conference game against UCF, and we're hoping to start out conference play with a win. But UCF dominated at home. There really wasn't much of a question. Once we got through the first half, UCF scored something like 41 points or 31 points in the second half and pulled away to win 41-19. On Friday, Houston went to Memphis and got the narrow victory, 33 to 32. Houston got a last-second touchdown, and which capped off a 26-point fourth quarter to seal the win by 1 point versus Memphis on the road. So Houston improves to 1-1 in conference, 3-3 overall. Memphis still ahead of them in conference at 4-2 overall and 2-1 in conference play. On Saturday, American Athletic Conference play, Cincinnati hosted South Florida and survived there. That's number 24 ranked Cincinnati, beat South Florida by only 4 points. So the Bulls gave it their all, gave it a good effort, but the Bearcats had the edge at home. Tulane hosted ECU and got a nice win there. Doesn't look like ECU scored a touchdown in that game, and Tulane got out with a win 24-9. And Navy had a nice win at home versus Tulsa, 53-21 in a game that might just be described as confusing. Navy played extremely well. Daba Fafana for the midshipmen ran for 159 yards and 3 touchdowns in the first half. So just a dominant play from the midshipmen to get their second conference win of the season so far. My 4th-ranked conference for the week is the Mountain West Conference. They started play on Friday between Colorado State and Nevada, and the Rams got the win there, 17-14 on the road. San Jose State hosted UNLV. UNLV, of course, the upstart of the Mountain West this year so far, but they couldn't get past San Jose State. They ended up winning 40-7. San Jose State did at home. So a nice win to improve to 2-0 in conference for San Jose State. On Saturday in the Mountain West, Utah State hosted Air Force, and another confusing team here. Utah State pulled out the win by a touchdown over Air Force. Air Force, who started out extremely strong, but is now sitting at 1-2 in conference, losing to Utah State, who's 2-4 overall, but sitting at 1-1 in Mountain West play. So we'll see if the Aggies can sort of turn things around on their season and finish strong in conference. Wyoming went to New Mexico and got a nice win, 27-14. Fresno State went to Boise State in what was a big rivalry game last week. But of course, on the blue turf, that challenging place to play, and that proved to be the case for the Bulldogs as well. And the Broncos won at home, 40-20. So Fresno State's concerns continue through the season. But San Diego State was able to have a nice win at home over Hawaii on Saturday. They beat the Rainbow Warriors 16-14 at home to improve to 1-1 in conference and 3-3 overall. Hawaii 1-5 overall and still looking for their first Mountain West win. Of course, that leaves my number 1 performing conference for the week, which this week, and probably until something drastic changes, goes to the Sun Belt. This week was full of upsets and rivalry games that did not disappoint. Starting on Saturday, we had the in-state rivalry of Georgia Southern versus Georgia State, which some are referring to as a modern-day hate rivalry, but I know some fans are discontented with that name, so we'll see how that evolves in the future. But Georgia State got a nice win at home versus Georgia Southern, who Georgia Southern continues to struggle against the upstart Panthers as their in-state rivals there. The Panthers, who have had some struggles this season, got their first Sun Belt win against Georgia Southern last weekend. So good for the Panthers. We'll see how that success continues throughout the rest of their Sun Belt play. James Madison continues on a roll here at 5-0 overall, 3-0 in the Sun Belt after a win 42-20 over Arkansas State on the road last week. James Madison, of course, got ranked by the AP this week. They're number 25 in the country. Absolutely unbelievable. I don't think it's ever happened that a team in their first 5 games as an FBS program have become ranked in the top 25 like this. They're just dominating. They're dominating and they're winning really great games. So hats off to the Dukes. We'll see if their success continues this weekend as they play Georgia Southern. So another interesting in-conference, in-division game this week. There's also a lot of talk about James Madison's eligibility for bowl games or conference championships or other postseason play at the end of the season. And it is true that currently, with the current rules, because James Madison is in their transition year, that they are not eligible for a conference championship or a bowl game. But seeing as they are one game away from being bowl eligible in their first season, and they are looking like the cream of the crop of the Sun Belt East, that very likely could end up playing or deserving to play for the conference championship. I would not be surprised to see the conversation around this start to heat up as long as James Madison continues to win. These rules, I don't know the history of them being put in place, but objectively as I can, this just it's a silly look for the Sun Belt and for the NCAA to not allow James Madison to play for in the postseason. They're playing lights out football. They are beating teams that were projected to be favorites in the conference, and so as long as they're eligible, I am a full proponent for James Madison being allowed to play in the postseason. But we'll see how that evolves throughout the season, and certainly if James Madison keeps on winning. Speaking of winning, Texas State got a nice win this weekend over Appalachian State down in San Marcos. Texas State improves to 1-1 in the Sun Belt and 3-3 overall. App State has a losing record in the Sun Belt, 1-2, but are 3-3 overall. Some interesting decisions being made in this game. Chase Bryce threw for almost 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, but also had a critical pick 6 in the game. Texas State otherwise dominated the game until a late second half push from App State. So credit to the Bobcats. They got a nice win at home over App State. App State, who have really struggled to score in this game. Pretty confusing. Things definitely need to be figured out on the offensive side of the ball as well as the defensive side of the ball before they play Georgia State at home next Wednesday. In the Sun Belt West this week, Troy hosted Southern Miss and won 27-10. Troy continues to impress in the West, and Coastal Carolina continues to win as well at 6-0 overall and 3-0 in the Sun Belt as they beat UL Monroe on the road 28-21 this week. A really dominant performance by Coastal Carolina running back C.J. Beasley, who ran for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as Coastal wide receiver Sam Pinckney, who had 9 receptions for 133 yards. The Chanticleers just really played well on the road to improve to 6-0 and 3-0 respectively. Looking ahead to Week 7 play, there are some really interesting matchups, and of course, as I said earlier, we're getting into more of the in-conference. We're getting more into conference play, so we're seeing fewer games, but in my opinion, more interesting matchups. On Thursday, October 13th, Temple is going to UCF. UCF, of course, dominant at home, but this game is on primetime on ESPN on Thursday. I think that Temple coming into town there might be a little opportunity for a home upset here, but I'll be surprised if UCF doesn't protect the home field advantage in this game. On Saturday in the AAC, Tulane is going to South Florida, and Memphis is going to ECU. Both of those games are on ESPNU at 4 and 7:30 respectively. So some interesting American Athletic Conference games on Saturday as well. In Conference USA on Friday, UTSA is going to FIU to play at 8 o'clock on CBS Sports Network. Meanwhile, on Saturday, there are a few other CUSA matchups. Charlotte goes to UAB, Louisiana Tech travels to North Texas, and Rice goes to Florida Atlantic. The MAC has a ton of conference games this week. Central Michigan goes to Akron in what should be an interesting matchup there. Central Michigan is favored pretty heavily, but it's the MAC, and Akron has home field advantage, so anything can happen in that matchup. That's at 12 o'clock. Another MAC at 12 o'clock on Saturday is Miami at Bowling Green, which should be a very good game as well. Miami has been playing above expectations for most of us, but Bowling Green also coming off a tough win versus Buffalo last week, but a nice win at Akron, and then versus Marshall, of course, in overtime earlier in the season. So could be an interesting game in Bowling Green there. Another game with two teams with high expectations, as Northern Illinois goes to Ypsilanti to play the Eastern Michigan Eagles. EMU is favored in that game, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Northern Illinois get a conference win in this matchup this weekend. And Ohio goes to Kalamazoo to play Western Michigan at 3:30 on Saturday, and you can watch that game on CBS Sports Network. A few good matchups in the Mountain West during Week 7 as well. Utah State goes to Colorado State in a game with two teams with hopes and positive thoughts for good seasons, but two teams that have just frankly struggled this year. So Utah State and Colorado State both have losing overall records, but Utah State is 1-1 in conference. Colorado State is 1-0 in conference. So we'll see how this game plays out on Saturday. I'm leaning towards the Aggies, but they have disappointed me before, so we'll just see what happens. Air Force is going to UNLV. We'll see if Air Force is able to get back to their winning ways. Of course, UNLV coming off a loss as well. But both of these teams have had good seasons so far. These two teams are also in different divisions in the Mountain West, but this is a conference game nonetheless, so they all count the same. And I think that this will be a really interesting matchup. This is a late one, 10:30 on Saturday evening on CBS Sports Network. And in the Sun Belt, we've got a Wednesday game in the Sun Belt this week. We've got Louisiana and Marshall, a replay of the bowl game last year. That is on ESPN2 at 7:30 on Wednesday. These are two teams that have had struggling seasons, perhaps underperforming based on what they would have hoped, even with Marshall's huge win over Notre Dame in Week 2. But this, I think, is going to be a great game. These are two strong teams, although their records aren't, they don't blow you away. The fact is that the Sun Belt East and the Sun Belt West are both strong this year. So to see these two teams playing as conference opponents for the first time in Marshall's first Sun Belt home game is going to be really exciting to watch that midweek on primetime on ESPN. On Saturday in the Sun Belt, Old Dominion goes to Coastal Carolina at noon. Texas State goes to Troy at 3:30. James Madison goes to Georgia Southern. They play at Georgia Southern at Paulson Stadium at 4 o'clock. As a ranked team going into Paulson Stadium, that's dangerous territory, as most App State fans will begrudgingly tell you. So we'll see if Georgia Southern has the upset brewing at home against the ranked Dukes, but we'll see how that plays out. But in the Sun Belt West, South Alabama hosts UL Monroe. South Alabama is performing extremely well and is highly favored in this game. But Monroe could do something big here. They had a nice win versus Louisiana just a few weeks ago. So we'll see who has the edge here in Mobile on Saturday night. Elsewhere in the Sun Belt West, Southern Miss is hosting Arkansas State at 7 o'clock on ESPN+. We've got 4 official rivalry games being played this week, so I'll try to kind of go through these as quickly as I can. There's some really interesting ones here. The first is Navy and SMU playing for the Gans Trophy. Navy and SMU have been playing since 1930. They've been playing this game since 1930. Although there have been large breaks between those games, this is actually only the 24th meeting between these two teams, but it does go back a long ways. And Navy does have the slight edge here at 13-10 over SMU, but SMU has won the last 2 and 3 out of the last 4 meetings between the two teams. So as far as historically speaking, most of these are pretty evenly split, although it's worth noting that Navy has the biggest wins in this meeting. Back in 2016, they won 75-31. Back in 2015, they won 55-14. And then back in 2008, they won 34-7. So a lot of these wins for Navy have been more lopsided, and the wins for SMU have been a little bit closer, but SMU does have the more recent edge, so we'll see who is ready to take home the Gans Trophy this week. SMU is projected to win by ESPN's FPI. They've got an 86% chance to win, and I think that's likely. I think SMU is going to win this game, but SMU's in bad form. They have 3 straight losses, 2 of those to Power 5 teams, but they're regardless, they're losses, and losses are losses. Navy is coming off a nice win versus Tulsa, so it could be that the midshipmen are taking shape and will be ready to play this game, but we'll have to see. Another interesting rivalry this weekend is the Rio Grande rivalry between New Mexico and New Mexico State, soon to be Conference USA member New Mexico State. Now, this rivalry goes back even farther, all the way back to 1894. These two teams have been playing, and they've played over 100 times. They've played 111 times, actually, since 1894. And the Lobos of New Mexico do have the edge here at 73-33 with 5 ties. And giving them credit where it's due, they do have most of the more recent wins as well. New Mexico State hasn't won this matchup since 2017. This is an interesting Aggies team. I feel like they're primed for to be the upsetters at any given moment. New Mexico does have the edge in ESPN's FPI. The Lobos are predicted to win with 71% chance of winning. So I think the safe bet is to pick the Lobos, but I think that New Mexico State, they've had some interesting games this season. Their only win so far coming against Hawaii, but it was a convincing win versus the Bows. So they haven't really played anyone like New Mexico yet. I think that this will be an interesting challenge for the Aggies. I think they could win, but the safe bet is certainly New Mexico in this installment of the Rio Grande rivalry. Another geographical rivalry is the Fresno State and San Jose State game this weekend. They play for the Valley Cup, and they've been playing this rivalry game since 1921. Almost 100 games played between these two teams since 1921, and Fresno State has the advantage here, 43-38 with 3 ties. So it's been pretty even, although Fresno State does have the most recent edge. They won last year 40-9 over San Jose State, and they've won 3 of the last 4 in pretty convincing fashion. The only one, actually 2 of the last 5 that San Jose State have won have been by 1 point in 2019 and 2 points in 2016. So more recently, Fresno State has been winning and winning big, but Fresno State appears to be down this year. So I think that this year is a good opportunity for San Jose State to get a win to get a notch in their win column in this rivalry. And ESPN's FPI gives them a 58% chance to win. It's pretty even, and I agree with that. So this will be a fun game for sure. It's a late one, past my bedtime, but I'll look forward to watching the highlights on Sunday. And last but certainly not least is a rivalry that I think is pretty exciting, the 100 Miles of Hate rivalry between Middle Tennessee State and Western Kentucky. This game has been played between these two teams since 1914, so another really old game, 71 meetings between these two teams over that time. And these are just two fan bases and two teams that do not like each other. Proximity-wise, they're fairly close. Recruiting wise, they have a similar footprint. So these teams have historically just gone at it, and you can see it's as even as it can get. Both teams have 35 wins and one tie in this matchup. So this is going to be a tiebreaker game for sure. Very exciting very excited to see how this one ends up. Western Kentucky has had the recent edge. They've won 6 of the last 7 versus Middle Tennessee. But of course, last year a big win, 48-21, of course, led by Bailey Zappi and the crew. So I think, Western Kentucky is not the same team they were last year, but they are still a very strong, particularly offensive team. And Middle Tennessee State is still allowing more points than they're earning. So I think that the Toppers have the edge in this 100 Miles of Hate game, but the result remains to be seen. That's why we play the games. And as I've been doing for the last couple of weeks, I consulted the G5 Hive Mind on Twitter to hear your questions, observations, concerns, and things like that from the previous week, as well as the games moving forward. So I really appreciate those of you who interact on social media or send in questions. Appreciate those, and be sure to keep an eye out for those tweets on usually Sundays or Mondays. If you'd like to share your thoughts, concerns, woes, excitement, that's your chance to do that, and you'll have a chance to be featured on the show as well. The first response I wanted to get to really quickly is from Go Herd, Please Don't Die, who I've heard from previously. Appreciate the interactions as always. They had a good question here. Can Marshall beat another ranked opponent on the road? And will a win against Louisiana Wednesday make Marshall respected again? Those are two different questions. So the first part of the question, referencing a ranked team on the road, is in reference to Marshall going to play James Madison next week on the 22nd. And of course, anything can happen between now and then, but as it stands now, JMU is ranked number 25. Bridgeforth is going to be rocking. I think that's their homecoming game for JMU, so it's going to be a packed stadium. The answer is yes. Marshall can certainly upset the Dukes on the road, and it would be a heck of an upset to do it on homecoming weekend in front of what is, I think I saw today, is a sold-out crowd. The Herd can do it, but I don't know that they will. I just don't know that they are going to be able to overcome some of their mistakes over the last few weeks to get that win. I do think that this game versus Louisiana this week is going to be very telling. I think that what Marshall needs to do is step up in a bigger game, especially an in-conference game. Marshall has wins versus Norfolk State and Gardner-Webb, 2 FCS programs, and of course the big win at Notre Dame in week 2. But those are their wins on the season. They've lost to Bowling Green, an old historical rival, and at Troy, a Sun Belt opponent. So they haven't, unfortunately, aside from the Notre Dame game, Marshall hasn't done anything to show me that they're ready to step up in a big time game like this. But conference play, even these games versus Louisiana and JMU, they are arguably a bigger deal for Marshall than the Notre Dame game, because Marshall's playing, or they're playing for a conference championship, and so I think that if Marshall can get wins versus Louisiana and at James Madison over the next 2 weeks, I think we're talking about we're changing the conversation about Marshall being the cream of the crop in the Sun Belt East. Of course, that's before they go to play, or they host Coastal Carolina the week after that. So the Sun Belt East doesn't get any easier for Marshall. So if they want to be respected again, they need to start winning against their Sun Belt opponents. That's a really good question. I got another question from Fun in the Sun. That's at FunbeltSmack2 on Twitter. The question is, what impact would JMU finishing the season 11-0 and ranked, but ineligible for the Sun Belt Conference Championship game and a bowl game have on the rules that prevent them from being ineligible for the postseason? I spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I think we'll already. The conversations are already happening, at least in the fan spaces on Twitter. The implications for these rules and what impact they would have on a fan base like the JMU fan base, who the team is just doing everything right. They're beating all their opponents. They're doing so pretty handily. Scary one there versus App, I guess, but that was on the road too. So JMU's beating all their opponents. They're doing what they're supposed to do. The likelihood of JMU going 11-0 is slim when you look at their schedule coming up. At Georgia Southern, which is a difficult place to play, hosting Marshall for homecoming, at Louisville, at Old Dominion, a nice in-state game there, and then finishing out with home games versus Georgia State and Coastal. I think that at the very least, the Marshall and the Louisville games are losable there. We'll see how things pan out with Coastal, of course. And Old Dominion has shown that they have some winning power this season as well. So will JMU finish 11-0? My bet is probably not. I think it's more likely at this point for them to finish with probably 1 or 2 losses. But I don't know exactly where they come from yet. But I do hope that before we even get there, the conversations are had about changing these rules. I just don't know how anyone, aside from a bitter fan base that has lost to JMU, I don't understand how any fan base or anyone watching this happening can't look at JMU and say that this team, if they win out the way that they're playing, that they don't deserve to play in the postseason. At this point, it's looking like they very well may play or win the Sun Belt East. And so for them to not represent the Sun Belt East in the conference championship just because it's their first season in the FBS, I think that's a rule that needs to be reevaluated, not for the future, but for this season, for this JMU team, and for the players that are really overcoming the odds, as tacky or silly as that might sound. So yeah, that's a good question, and I hope that it gets addressed before it's too late. Moving on to my matchup of the week. This week, my matchup of the week is between the Kent State Golden Flashes and the Toledo Rockets. This matchup is on Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern at the Glass Bowl in Toledo, Ohio, and you can watch it on ESPN+. To help me preview this game, I reached out to the guys at the College Sports Connection podcast to get their input. Let's hear from them now.
All right, everybody, Alex, the captain here from the College Sports Connection podcast, here to preview the Kent State Golden Flashes versus the Toledo Rockets. Kent State comes into the matchup this weekend at a 2-4 record, 1-1 in the Mid-American Conference. Last week, they took on Miami, Ohio, lost a heartbreaking game, 27-24. On the other side of the ball, Toledo absolutely decimated Northern Illinois, 52-32 in DeKalb. A game in which a lot of people expected this to be the MAC West Championship, and Toledo, right off the rip, in the first 4 minutes, went up 14-0 after a pick six by Quinyon Mitchell, who finished the game with 4 interceptions and 2 pick sixes. And Toledo was all gas, no brakes, as they put up the 50-burger on the Huskies. Kent State, again, did lose the heartbreaker to Miami of Ohio, 27-24. The week before, however, many Kent State players made their way into the record books at Kent State, including Dante Cephas, who had 246 receiving yards. Colin Schlee, 5th all-time single-game passing record, and Marquise Cooper with 240 rushing yards. All 3 of those gentlemen earned their way into the history books and the record books at Kent State. Coming into the matchup this weekend, Colin Schlee has 1,386 passing yards. He does have 8 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. Toledo, DeQuan Finn, name everybody knows, who dazzled against Ohio State. 1,134 yards, 11 passing touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. The tale of the season, however, the running backs. Toledo has done a lot of running back by committee, hasn't had a true leader emerge until last week. They are, however, headlined by DeQuan Finn, who has 368 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. For Kent State, Marquise Cooper, again, 125 carries, 542 yards, 6 touchdowns on the ground. Receiving-wise, Dante Cephas for Kent State, he has 619 yards with 3 scores. And Demir Blankumsey for Toledo, 341 yards and 1 score. He has been the breakout player for the Rockets. Looking at how this matchup's going to be, Toledo arguably has the best defense in the Mid-American Conference. This year, they have only allowed 25.5 points a game, and that's including the game against Ohio State, in which they surrendered 77 points on the road. They are also averaging 36 points a game. That's including the game against San Diego State, in which they only put up 14 points on the road. Kent State, they're averaging 27.2 points a game, doing pretty well moving the ball through the air and on the ground against their opponents. They did put up 20 against Washington. They did put up 22 against Georgia. So this is a team who has the ability to score and move the ball, especially against some pretty good defenses. It's going to be interesting to watch the yards through the air. Right now, Kent State does have the edge, 236 yards through the air compared to Toledo's 200 through the air. Rushing, Kent State still holds the edge, 200 on the ground to Toledo's 188. Now, this is where the tale gets interesting. Kent State is allowing over 440 yards, both through the air and on the ground on defense, while Toledo, just over 350 total yards, holding opponents to under 200 a game passing and under 155 a game rushing. Again, looking at the last few weeks, Toledo is undefeated in MAC play, taking down 2 potential MAC West contenders in Central Michigan and Northern Illinois. And they did it in pretty dominating fashion, averaging over 20 points in victory margin in each of the 2 contests. Obviously, the heartbreaker at Ohio State was pretty expected for the Rockets, a 77-21 loss. It was the week after at San Diego State with the loss of DeQuan Finn. For more than half the game, Toledo lost that game 17-14. Looking at Kent State's losses, again, they did put up 22 against Georgia and actually gave Georgia a scare for a while. Georgia pulled away, winning 39-22. The loss to Oklahoma on the road to kick off the season, 33-3. Not what you want, not ideal, but they did have them close in the first half. Their wins, big wins for them, beating Long Island University out of the FCS 63-10, and a win over Ohio in overtime, the record-setting day for the Kent State offense. That was a big one to move them to 1-1 in conference play. As we look forward to this game, the big things that need to happen. Toledo is currently a 9-point favorite, so Kent State needs to be on their A game. If you can force DeQuan Finn to make decisions that he doesn't want to make, he does have 5 interceptions on the year. If you can make DeQuan Finn make decisions he doesn't want to make, Kent State could be in this game. I'm not discounting the Kent State offense, who at times has shown a lot of explosiveness. Not a lot of points, again, only averaging 27 points a contest. However, when they show up and they're ready to play and ready to explode, they can do it, like they've proven against some pretty stout defenses like that of Georgia. Defensively, watch for Nico Bolden, Marvin Pierre, and JoJo Evans to make some real noise for this Kent State defense. Combined, these 3 have over 120 tackles on the season. They have several pass deflections, and this is a defensive side, the safety, the linebacker, and the other safety. These are guys who really know how to come out and play and really force opponents to beat them. Looking at what Toledo brings to the table, obviously we mentioned it ad nauseum, Daquan Finn, a great guy who knows what he's doing. We spoke briefly about how they haven't had a true running back who can just take over a game and dominate on the ground like we've seen in years past with guys such as Kareem Hunt, Brian Koback, David Fluellen, Terry Swanson. These are all guys who have now made it to the league from the Max running back university. Jaquez Stewart, I think, is the next in line between him and Penny Boone, the transfer from Big Ten school Rutgers. These guys look to really establish what the backfield needs to look like this season. Stewart last week, 11 carries, 73 yards, and a score, averaging just over 7 yards a carry. An impressive effort for the young man. Really looking forward to seeing what he does in this game. Now, Toledo is again the 9-point favorite, and I think that they're going to carry that with them. They do have arguably the best defense in the MAC between guys like Jamal Hines, Dallas Gant, Deontay Johnson, Deshaun Johnson, Maxon Hook, Zachary Ford, Judge Culpepper. The list just goes on and on and on. This is a very, very stout defense for Toledo. These are guys who have a chip on their shoulder. They understand last year was not the year that they wanted as a program, especially when they were picked to win the conference. This year, they're coming back. They're focused. They're playing sharp. Toledo is doing a lot of really good things right now. A lot of things that a lot of teams really need their players to do. This is an offense who can bury you in a hole very quickly. This is a defense who can be very suffocating, but I don't count Kent State out yet. Last week against Northern Illinois, Toledo had a plus 30-point advantage on the Huskies. I believe it was a 37-point advantage. Toledo surrendered 25 points in the fourth quarter. Still rolled away with a 20-point victory. However, Kent State has a much better offense than Northern Illinois, so Toledo's going to really need to make sure that they don't surrender the big plays, don't give up the onside kicks, and really establish their will. Kent State, they need to do what they do best. Get the ball into the hands of Marquise Cooper and Dante Cephas. Colin Schlee has looked really comfortable taking over for his predecessor. I don't have any concerns about his ability to move the ball to help this offense to score when they need to. The defense is vastly improved from a year ago, a defense that was leaking like a sieve, just giving up points and yards to everybody. Now, I do believe that this will be a Rockets victory. Toledo has looked every bit of the part that they kind of projected themselves to be this year, a tough defense with a good offense behind dual threat superstar Daquan Finn. I do think that Kent State is going to make this one a close game. It's going to be an interesting battle, but I do believe Toledo walks out of the Glass Bowl this weekend. A 38-21 victory over the Kent State Golden Flashes.
Thanks to Alex for his input on that. I think that this matchup between the Golden Flashes and the Rockets is going to be a good one. These are two teams that know each other very well. Historically, Toledo has the advantage here. They've been playing since 1955, and Toledo has 27 wins to Kent State's 21 wins. And that includes Toledo's last 5 wins straight in the series, including some big ones like in 2015, 38-7 at home at the Glass Bowl. So these two teams have played each other many, many times. They go back a long time in the MAC. And Toledo does have the advantage going into this game. They're 4-2 overall, 2-0 in conference. Kent State is at 2-4 overall and 1-1 in conference. The numbers just they favor Toledo pretty clearly here. Kent State their defense is still giving up more points than their offense can score, and it's hard to win games that way, and that's reflected in their record. Like I said, 2-4 overall. Their wins this season being versus Long Island University and an overtime win versus Ohio a couple of weeks ago. but their losses, and it's their non-conference schedule. Kent State's this year has been absolutely unbelievable. They've had losses at Washington, the Huskies, at number 7 Oklahoma, at the time number 7, at number 1 Georgia. And then last week they lost to Miami of Ohio. But their non-conference schedule is absolutely brutal this year. So perhaps we should be looking more closely at their 1-1 conference record. But with Toledo's offense being led by dual threat quarterback DeQuan Finn, who's just absolutely lighting it up. He's got 11 passing touchdowns and 5 rushing touchdowns on the season so far. So the Rockets' offense definitely goes through Finn, and he is having a great year. But I also know that Kent State has a good offense as well. Their quarterback, Colin Shalee, and their leading wide receiver, Dante Cephas, they're an excellent pairing. It really, I think, is going to come down to the Kent State defense in this game. And unfortunately, defenses struggle on the road, and Toledo is the home game here. So I'm giving Toledo the advantage here at home. I think that this is going to be a great game. I think it's going to be high scoring. But my prediction is that Toledo wins this game at home 33-24 in the Glass Bowl. And that's my Group of 5 matchup of the week. Thanks for joining me this week on the Group of 5 Focus podcast. Reach out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at G5FPod to join the conversation and let me know what you think about my picks and previews. And if you haven't already, please follow, rate, and review on your podcast platform of choice, and be sure to share it with your favorite Group of 5 fans. That's all for this week on the Group of 5 Focus podcast. Special thanks to Alex at the College Sports Connection for his help on this one. Be sure to check the episode description for their Twitter handles and give them a follow. Until next time, my question for you is, what is one thing you can do to showcase the power of the Group of 5?